Water, earth, fire, air. Only the Avatar, master of all 4 elements, could stop them. But when the world needed him most, he vanished.
Hey Exiles, Chronic Painless here with another update for my Blade Vortex League Starter Build Guide in patch 3.27. In this video, I'm going to go over what I consider to be the 4 domains of late game BV investment, and I'm talking about DPS, Explodiness, Tankiness, and Speed. I'm going to go through some POBs that are my effort to go all in on these various domains. I've left a speed POB out for now. Going full speed is kind of its own thing. It could involve self-chill and other technical things that I still need to do some more testing with in this most recent patch. But I will still talk about some of the important items to target when speed is one of your primary goals. In my last video, I presented what was a very well-rounded loadout. The goal with that was to be just a very strong mapper who still had enough single target damage to take down whatever beefy rares or breach bosses or whatever else might be thrown at you in the course of a map. However, once you are that well-rounded, with that much invested, it can be a little difficult to improve the build from there without just getting better versions of the items you already have. What would be more efficient is starting to specialize. Once you get to a certain point of investment, you really need to start thinking about what content you want to farm and try to specialize the build to take care of that. So let's start with my personal favorite, going all in on DPS. This is the kind of loadout that you would run if you were doing some kind of uber bossing build against bosses who didn't have very prolonged guaranteed immunity phases that you would have to tank or dodge your way through. That's not to say I've gone full ZHP or anything like that. I wanted these builds to be all in on the stat they were focused on, but also be functional. I left them with life leech, ailment immunity, all that sort of stuff is all going to be in there. So these are not just POB warrior builds. These are actual functional builds that you could use if you manage to get this pretty incredible collection of items together, or at least something to strive for as you start assembling them. Now, of course, one of the primary differences between a well-rounded loadout and a pure DPS loadout will be the shield. I would not use a Sphalin in a pure DPS situation, of course, and the goal would be probably something like this, assuming you still wanted to use shield charge. If you don't need shield charge, you're not doing something that involves actually moving around at all, just use 2 scepters. No reason to not dual wield in that case. But assuming you do still want shield charge, this is the kind of shield that you would want, synthesized with a max power charge implicit, and then crafted out with high spell damage, crit chance, fizz skills, and some nice crafted mods on top. I love double damage while focused for this kind of lineup because when you're pumping out this much DPS, you might only need 4 seconds of DPS in order to take down your target. And so focus is something that I definitely aim for at this level of investment. The helm is just a slightly improved version of the one on the well-rounded loadout, and the body armor is another major change. This Foulborn Coming Calamity with the 100% increased effect of Herald buffs is a perfect example of the kind of thing that I would only put on if I was really min-maxing DPS at the cost of other stats. This is providing a huge amount of damage. The 100% increased effect of Herald buffs is, of course, going to be working on the Lost Unity and all the Heralds that I'm using to support it. So altogether, this chest is giving me actually closer to 30% DPS than the 33% DPS than the 15% you see down there. Absolutely worth targeting if DPS is the goal. I even went as far as to finally pick up the Lycia bloodline for this DPS loadout. In the past, I've talked about how I thought this was just too much of an opportunity cost to pay, And that would be the case if I wasn't all in on DPS and if I wasn't doing so much to min-max the Herald buffs with the rest of the build. This is the kind of thing that if you do manage to really go for it, synergize with it, then yeah, you will see some pretty strong results. But just adding it casually would almost certainly not be worth giving up one of your other ascendancies if your goal is to stay well-rounded. Of course, Hrim Sorrows still in the mix, going to be by far the most efficient way of converting your physical damage into cold damage. The only real reason to go rare gloves is if you are looking for some tankiness, if you need some suppression on those gloves, if you feel like you're missing out on the max life that you could get from rare gloves. Those are the situations where it makes sense to actually swap to them. But if you just are looking to pump the DPS, then it's going to be really hard to beat the efficiency of a pair of well-corrupted Hrim Sorrows. The boots are fairly simple. Little Fizz has extra cold on the implicit and some scorched ground. Since I have plenty of crit chance elsewhere, I don't even need to use brittle. Another major difference between a DPS loadout and a well-rounded loadout is the amulet. A heist amulet is absolutely the amulet to go for when you are pumping the DPS. There's just no way you're going to beat this much plus the skills and crit multi. Obviously, you could even get a mirrored, reflecting misted version of this to be even crazier. I tried to keep the gear, aspirational without being completely ludicrous. And so there will certainly be amulets that look like this. I'm probably going to try to craft one myself. And while Replica Dragonfang's Flight does provide a lot of utility with the attribute reduction and mana reservation on top of the damage, this is just so much damage that we can certainly make up those other things elsewhere while we are pumping the DPS. Naturally going to still be using the Lost Unity Ring. Talked enough about that in my previous videos and how to get that going. But instead of a explodey barracks ring, what you would be looking for if you're pumping DPS is a Circle of Ambition. This can give even more Herald buff effect for some of your Heralds, or just increase damage while affected by the Heralds. And if you're super lucky, you might even get one that has a +1 max power charge implicit. This would be the dream. Anything that's even close to this is going to be a ring worth wearing when you're in a loadout like this. Naturally, still going to be wearing Mage Blood for the consistency, and even going as far as to bring in a Ruby Flask with regen so that we can run a constant Righteous Fire. Still wanted to fix the res to make this functional. Still wanted to have the 100% ailment immunity, and Cinder Swallow, definitely the best single target DPS flask. I don't know why it doesn't seem to be working in POB right now. I had to do some custom configs to make that work, as well as some others. Heraldry doesn't seem to be working. There's a lot of strange stuff going on right now, but still, these numbers I'm pretty sure are accurate based on what I've done here. It would also be a good idea in these cases to get a graft that is covering enemies in frost. That's just another big damage boost that you can use, but can be a little awkward to take advantage of sometimes. A graft is the perfect place to do so. So definitely pop one of those on if you're doing some bossing. Moving quickly down to the jewels, I would still use the Heart of Destruction, Forbidden Flesh and Flame. The convergence damage is a very nice boost, and the fact that it's only a temporary boost is less important in a loadout like this, because hopefully anything we're hitting should be dead before convergence ends. I would also, of course, replace all of the area damage clusters with some Herald boosting clusters, getting that buff effect, getting that increased damage buff for myself from all the Heralds that I have. This is super efficient DPS in the form of a medium cluster, and so I'm spamming as many of these as I can fit pretty much, and even going as far as to try to sneak a 1-node Voices in there. A 3-node would probably be okay too, and this is also going to get more just generic jewels in there where we can pick up that multi, get a little mana reservation efficiency maybe, and of course still being ailment immune with the Storm Shroud. As far as the Watcher's Eye, these would be the best mods to target That base crit chance is really strong. Theoretically, you could replace that, but none of the other hatred mods are particularly great. However, getting the huge pen on the cold damage from hatred and the critical strikes pen from zealotry is a deadly combo that makes this the ultimate Watcher's Eye for DPS. As for the skills, it's fairly similar to the well-rounded loadout, except I've given up the Sublime Vision so I could get back Zealotry, very powerful DPS aura that of course won't do anything for explosions, which is why I wasn't using it in the well-rounded loadout, and the Vitality in order to run the constant Righteous Fire. Now we have just enough regen to get this done here, and when you are pumping, getting the Righteous Fire going is a big deal. It's just a huge amount of spell damage, and if you can sustain it, then it is absolutely worth running. I'm still using this random Herald of Ash to represent the Lost Unity Herald of the Hive. This way I could check its buff effect and its mana reservation, and so that's the reason that this extra Herald of Ash is here, so don't worry about that. Taking a quick look at the skill tree, you can see the shape is largely the same as it was in the well-rounded loadout. Of course, we've gotten rid of the Red Nightmare over here and the Unnatural Instinct over here, since that was providing us block chance and mapping utility in the form of stats and life and energy shield on kill. That was the primary motive behind the Unnatural Instinct over there. But if you just want to pump DPS, don't waste that jewel slot on anything but some crit multi. Naturally, Assassin's Mark is going to be back in the mix. Going to want a way to generate those power charges against single targets as well. And if you're worried about things dying too soon to generate those charges, one sneaky thing you can do is have a weapon swap to a Jaws of Agony shield with some trap skills in it. Throw down a few traps, and you'll be at maximum power charges to engage the boss, and they will certainly be dead before the charges have time to expire. I think that just about covers the DPS loadout. Now let's talk about tankiness. It is absolutely possible to make your BV into an extremely beefy boy, and this is how I would go about doing it if that was my goal. So naturally, going to keep the Sphalen on. Still going to want to run an 8-link helm for the damage because I wanted this to be a functional build. But as we move down to the body armor, that's where things really start to change. Not going to run a Carcass Jack or a Coming Calamity when we're trying to be tanky. And so just bringing in some rare armor with powerful Eldritch Implicits is the best option here. Picking up that attack block is huge. You can get a Veiled mod as well as an Eldritch Implicit and get lots of attack block here. And getting that flask effect is nice when you're running so many defensive flasks on your Mage Blood setup. Moving down to the gloves, as I mentioned before, when you're tanky, that's when you want to go for rare gloves. You got to get that suppression, you want that max life, and you don't have to give up complete investment in damage. You can try to get temple modded version of these. People will absolutely be crafting gloves that are very similar to this all league long, and this is what I would want to target if I was going full tank. The boots are pretty standard, nothing too exciting, just some suppression, some regen, and getting that brittle to make the build feel okay in terms of damage. As for the amulet, Replica Dragonfang's Flight is maybe not the absolute best option for tankiness in and of itself, but what it is doing is giving that reservation efficiency that lets me put the Petrified Blood directly onto the Arrogance. Petrified Blood reserves 35% of mana, so putting it on Arrogance and still having enough unreserved life to get the Overleech going means you have to get a lot of life reservation efficiency. So in addition to the Mastery and the Runegraft of Treachery, I would also need the Replica Dragonfang's Flight to get it there. And so that's mainly the impetus behind keeping that. And you can always anoint as the mountain in order to make it feel a little tankier, getting that attack block, getting that max attack block. And that's what's getting me to that 90% effective block chance for attacks. As for the rings, I think Circle of Ambition would still be the place to go. You can get the physical damage reduction while affected by Herald of Purity, and Synth Implicits can actually provide a substantial amount of tankiness. Naturally, the Mage Blood is still going to be the play, and our flasks, aside from the Flask of the Cheetah, are going to be all defensive. You could obviously put yet another defensive flask on here, a Basalt, if you really wanted to. But like I said, I wanted these builds to be functional and somewhat reasonable, and so I can't imagine running a Mage Blood without a Quicksilver Flask of the Cheetah, and I'll let the rest of the flasks do the heavy lifting on the tankiness. So of course we have the Quartz Flask for the suppression, the Granite Flask for the armor, the Jade Flask for the evasion, and the big ticket item here, the Progenesis. Progenesis, one of the best items in the game for tankiness, absolutely a prime target when you are running a loadout like this, one of the first big investments you're going to want to make. The passive tree and the jewels are similar to the well-rounded loadout. Major difference would be the Watcher's Eye. You can go for some very excellent defensive mods on this for your determination and grace. These two are probably the most potent since they are giving additional physical reduction and additional chance to evade on top of whatever percent you manage to come up with from your armor and from your evasion. So when you are heavily invested in those, giving a big bonus on top becomes the most efficient way to scale them. I also opted to get the passive points on the tree or block as opposed to running the bone offering. This gives me a little bit of extra max block for both spells and attacks, which is really nice. That's what gets you to that 90 and 89% as opposed to the 87% of the well-rounded loadout. And it may not seem like a big difference, but getting hit 10% of the time instead of 13% of the time is just about 30% less damage taken. Also made some changes in the ascendancies. Since we're not pumping the DPS or the explosions, we don't need the Shaper of Storms and Shaper of Flames, and instead it can get the Shaper of Winter. This is very nice for tankiness against big single targets. A lot of the time, though, defensive layers that only work on enemies you've already hit are going to be a little less palpable than those that are working against long-range enemies who are starting to attack you before you've had a chance to introduce them to your Blade Vortex. Still, though, if you're trying to min-max the tankiness, Shaper of Winter, great option. As for the Forbidden Flesh and Flame, I went for a Frigid Wake, but what would probably be a little bit better of a play would be to simply get one of these ascendancies that we're already wanting to pick up, the Bastion, the Bringer of Ruin, the Golems, or the Shaper of Winter, and then pop down here for this Breachlord Bloodline. Certainly going to be a great way to take less damage. Unfortunately, though, not working in POB just yet. And then quickly going over the skills here. Naturally, we are getting Grace, Determination going. Flesh and Stone providing a huge amount of EHP, since of course we're going to be near most targets. And the other little change would be running, a Stone Golem of Safeguarding. Certainly a benefit and the other golems are not going to be providing any defense, so might as well get him in there. Other than that, everything is pretty much the same as in the well-rounded loadout. Now for the last POB in this little series here, this is what it would look like if I was trying to really min-max my explosions. The target numbers here was this enemy life equivalent, also the average hit. I was trying not to focus too much on the ignite damage from the explosions. It is a factor, but ideally we want things to be exploding instantly and chaining all the way through. And so that's also where the huge AoE of the explosions comes in, right? I wasn't really even looking at the BV DPS here. It's still functional. Obviously, the build is going to still work just fine, but this is what we're really trying to min-max with this loadout. So as with the DPS loadout, dumping this Phelan for some DPS shield. This isn't super helpful to the explosions, except with the 8% lightning damage as extra chaos. That, of course, is going to help the barracks lightning deal just a little bit more damage. So that's getting in there. Carcass Jack, I still think, is the #1 choice for explosion maxing. Getting an explode chest on top of the barracks just seems like overkill in the damage department when what really is going to stop your explosions from chaining is not enough AoE, and you're not going to get more AoE than this on any sort of chess piece. Everything else more or less the same. Naturally still going to be wearing the Hrimsarls, going to want that elemental weakness on hit to make those explosions that much more potent. I also even went as far as to go for an increased effect of Flame Golem buff, Eldritch Implicit on the boots here. This is a little min-maxy and certainly not providing a ton of benefit, but just an example of the kind of stuff you would think about if you were really pushing your AoE to the limits. Replica Dragonfangs still in play. Naturally, you're going to want the Herald of the Hive with that huge generic more damage bonus. And of course, the engine that's making the whole thing run, the Foulborn Barracks Respite. I've talked plenty about this in my past videos, so I'll just move on to say that when you're going max explosions, Headhunter is the move. Assuming you're going to be killing lots and lots of rare monsters in those explosions, Headhunter is going to provide much more tangible value than the Mage Blood. And with that, you can also run some more unique flasks, such as Aziris, such as the Wise Oak. This, with some balanced resistances, will make your explosions pen the enemy's resistances, which is really important for getting them to chain in maps that are giving the enemies resistances. Moving down to the tree, this is where things do start to get a little different. Of course, still want some Herald buff effect clusters, because these are going to be giving a lot of generic damage. They're going to be pumping up that Herald of the Hive, and that's going to be really helping our explosion damage. And still, though, going to want to get the AoE clusters on top of that and making sure we're maxing those power charges, including getting a Forbidden Power Flesh and Flame. That would certainly be the goal here. These are very expensive, so probably one of the last pieces you'd want to add, but certainly on the list of targets. I've taken out pretty much everything that was only benefiting spells in favor of this generic AoE. I even got an Impossible Escape to get that little bit of skill duration, to get the Ash, Frost, and Storm for the ailment effect, which is really nice. And you can even pick up a little bit of AoE down from these 2 points here if your goal is min-maxing that stat. For the fourth domain of speed, that kind of loadout would have too many moving parts for me to just put together a theoretical POB and put it out into the world. That's the kind of thing that I would really need to test in this most recent patch before I can sign off on it. And unfortunately, I didn't have time to do that just yet. So for now, I'll just say that when you are looking to get a little bit of extra speed in the late game, one of the most important things you can target are these Onslaught Tailwind Elusive boots. Definitely going to be worth giving up Brittle at a certain point and gaining Elusive on crit, getting that extra movement and attack and cast speed during Onslaught, and of course the Tailwind giving us that action speed is going to be quite palpable in your mapping. Just make sure you're getting a very strong roll on the chance to gain Elusive. We can suffer from success a little bit here in that sometimes you will just clip the edge of a pack and blow up the whole thing, and you actually won't do all that many hits that are necessarily going to be critting. Since our explosions can crit, but it's far from guaranteed, getting this as close to 10% as possible is really important. You will absolutely notice the difference between 10% elusive and a minimum rolled elusive. That's all I've got for this video. These POBs are clearly aspirational. Don't expect to fully recreate any of them over the course of the league, but the items in them are all items that I would certainly want to target as I start pumping the numbers in those different directions. I think my next in-game project is going to be getting a Sanctum runner going. That's always really fun with BV. BV crushes the Sanctum, and so look forward to another video there. And in the meantime, try to stay painless.